A homeless man is kicked out of a luxury restaurant, dismissed as invisible. But minutes later, the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan, walks in, and everything changes. In that one moment, power, compassion, and justice collide. What happens when the world's most iconic athlete refuses to turn a blind eye? One man's chance at redemption becomes a fight for respect that no one saw coming. Would you stand up for someone no one else would? This is the moment that exposes the truth behind the doors of privilege. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. Michael watches the man from across the street. The way he hesitates at the entrance, his fingers gripping the straps of his tattered backpack, eyes darting between the people inside and the pavement beneath his feet. Something about the scene unsettles Michael. Maybe it's the hesitation, the unspoken question in the man's stance, like he's measuring his worth against the glow of chandeliers and the murmur of laughter inside. Michael steps closer, pretending to check his phone. He watches as a doorman, dressed in a crisp uniform, steps forward. The homeless man straightens his posture, clearing his throat as if preparing for a battle already lost. "Sir, I was just wondering if maybe—" "No." The doorman's voice is firm, expression unreadable. The man swallows hard. "I don't want money. I can work. Wash dishes, clean tables, anything. Just a warm meal, man." The doorman sighs, his patience thinning. "Move along." Michael feels something twist inside him. He's seen rejection before, in boardrooms, on courts, in deals that never closed. But this, it's different. It's the kind of rejection that doesn't just deny a request. It denies existence. The homeless man nods, as if he expected it. He turns to leave. Before Michael knows what he's doing, he steps forward. "Hold on." The doorman stiffens, finally noticing Michael properly. "Sir, is there a problem?" Michael ignores him and turns to the man. "You hungry?" The homeless man blinks, caught between hope and disbelief. Yeah." Michael gestures toward the entrance. "Come on, let's eat." The doorman hesitates but steps aside when he catches the intensity in Michael's gaze. Inside, the restaurant's warmth is almost suffocating after the cold outside. A waiter eyes them warily before leading them to a corner booth. Michael can feel the stares, the whispers. They sit. The man fidgets, running a hand over his unshaven face. "You got a name?" Michael asks. "Daryl." Michael nods. He slides the menu across the table. "Order whatever you want." Daryl hesitates as if afraid to touch it. Michael senses his reluctance. "I got it. No catches." Daryl exhales, nodding. "Thank you." The food arrives, steaming plates filling the space between them. Daryl eats slowly at first, then faster, as if expecting someone to take it away. Michael lets him. Between bites, Daryl glances up. "Why are you doing this?" Michael leans back. It's a good question, one he hasn't fully answered himself. "Maybe I just wanted some company," he says, offering a small smile. Daryl studies him, as if weighing the truth in his words. "You don't look like the kind of guy who needs company," he says finally. Michael chuckles. "You'd be surprised." Silence settles between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy. Daryl looks around, eyes flicking over the expensive decor, the silk-draped tables, the clinking glasses. "I used to eat in places like this," he admits. Michael raises a brow. "Yeah?" Daryl nods. "Worked in finance. Good job. Good life." He exhales. Then, one bad decision. One wrong investment. Everything gone. Michael doesn't push. He knows that kind of fall. The way the world stops seeing you when you have nothing left to give. Daryl clears his throat. "What about you? You look like you belong here." Michael smiles, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe I do. Maybe I don't." Daryl studies him again. "You're somebody, aren't you?" Michael shrugs. "I used to think so." Daryl doesn't push either. Maybe he understands. As the meal winds down, Michael waves for the check. The waiter hesitates. "Sir, are you sure?" Michael levels him with a look. "I said, check." The waiter nods quickly. Darryl wipes his mouth with a napkin, glancing toward the door. "I should go." Michael watches him. "Where?" Darryl chuckles, but there's no humor in it. "Back to my corner, maybe a shelter if I'm lucky." Michael pulls out his wallet and places a few crisp bills on the table. "Here." Darryl shakes his head. "I can't take." "It's not charity." Michael holds his gaze. "It's a restart." Darryl hesitates, then takes the money. "I won't waste it." Michael nods. "I know." As they step outside, the cold air biting, Darryl turns to him. "You know, you didn't have to do this." Michael exhales, glancing at the city lights. "Yeah, but sometimes we do things not because we have to." He meets Darryl's gaze. "But because we should." Darryl nods. "I won't forget this." Michael watches as Darryl walks away, disappearing into the night. He stands there for a long time, alone, but somehow not empty. For the first time in a long while, silence doesn't feel like a price. It feels like peace. Michael Jordan steps into the restaurant, his presence commanding without effort. The laughter from the customers fades as they recognize him. Grant, the manager, straightens his posture, instantly shifting his demeanor from arrogance to forced politeness. "Mr. Jordan, what an honor," Grant says, extending his hand. Michael doesn't take it. His eyes flick to the glass door, where the homeless man is already walking away, shoulders hunched against the cold. Then he looks back at Grant. "That man. Why did you turn him away?" Grant hesitates, caught off guard. "Sir, we have a standard to uphold. Our clientele expect a certain—" Michael cuts him off. "A certain what?" His voice is calm, but there's an edge beneath it. Grant swallows. He doesn't fit here. Michael exhales slowly. He turns to Lena, the waitress who had watched it all unfold. "What's your name?" "Lena," she says softly, unsure of where this is going. "Lena. Do you think that man deserved to be turned away?" Lena shifts on her feet, glancing at Grant, whose expression darkens. The unspoken warning is clear. Choose your words carefully. Michael notices. "It's okay. Tell me the truth." Lena hesitates for only a moment before shaking her head. "Number. He didn't deserve that." Michael nods. "Good." Then he turns and walks out. A murmur spreads through the restaurant. Grant exchanges confused glances with the staff. Outside, Michael spots the homeless man half a block away. He picks up his pace, catching up. "Hey." The man stops, glancing over his shoulder warily. Michael steps closer. "I want you to come back with me." The man's brows furrow. "Why?" "Because that place needs to learn something about respect." The man hesitates as if expecting some kind of trick. Then, with a slow nod, he turns around and walks beside Michael. When they step back into the restaurant, the silence is almost deafening. Grant's face flushes as he sees them return. "Mr. Jordan, Michael raises a hand, silencing him. Then he turns to Lena. "Get us a table." Lena hesitates, then nods quickly. She leads them to a booth near the center of the restaurant where no one can ignore them. Michael gestures for the man to sit first, then joins him. He doesn't look at the menu, doesn't even acknowledge the awkward stares. Instead, he looks at Grant. "I'd like to see how you handle this now." Grant's jaw tightens. For a moment, he looks like he wants to argue. But Michael Jordan is not a man you argue with. He exhales sharply and signals to a waiter. The tension remains thick as Lena takes their order. Michael notices the way her hands shake slightly as she writes. She's nervous, but also determined. The meal is served. The homeless man, who finally introduces himself as Eric, eats with careful, deliberate bites, his movements restrained, as if still unsure whether he truly belongs here. Michael leans back, watching the room. The other patrons are pretending not to stare, but he can feel their eyes on them. The air is thick with unspoken judgment, curiosity, and discomfort. Halfway through the meal, an older man from a nearby table speaks up. "You're making a scene, Mr. Jordan." Michael turns to him, expression unreadable. "Am I?" The man shrugs. "This restaurant has standards. People pay good money to be here. You bringing in someone off the street? It changes the atmosphere." Michael studies him for a long moment, then smiles. But there's no warmth in it. Good. Maybe it needed to change. The man huffs, shaking his head. Not everyone is meant to belong everywhere. Michael leans forward. "Is that right? Tell me, how do you decide who belongs and who doesn't?" The man doesn't answer. Michael nods, as if he expected that. "See, that's the problem. Too many people think they get to decide who's worth something and who isn't. But they don't." He looks around the restaurant. "I've played in stadiums packed with thousands of people who screamed my name, who treated me like I was the greatest man alive. But strip away the fame, the money, the records. What's left? Would you still let me sit here if I didn't have all of that?" Silence. Michael exhales, turning back to Eric. "Eat. Take your time." Eric nods, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Dignity, maybe. As they finish, Michael signals for the check. But before Lena can bring it, Grant steps forward. "It's on the house, Mr. Jordan," he says, forcing a tight smile. Michael shakes his head. "No." He takes out his wallet, pulling out several $100 bills. "This is for the meal." Then he pulls out another stack. "And this is for Lena." Lena's eyes widen. "Sir, You spoke up when you didn't have to," Michael says. "That's worth something." She takes the money with trembling hands. Michael stands, turning to Eric. "You need anything else?" Eric shakes his head, but there's something lighter in his expression now. "Number." "You've done more than enough." Michael nods. "Take care of yourself." As he and Eric step outside, Michael takes one last glance at the restaurant. The customers avoid his gaze. Grant looks humiliated. Lena, however, stands tall, her grip on the money tight. Michael doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. As he walks away, he knows one thing for certain. Belonging isn't something others decide for you. It's something you claim for yourself. The restaurant hums with forced elegance, clinking glasses, low conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from polished customers in tailored suits. But beneath it all, there's tension, the kind that lingers when something has gone wrong but no one wants to acknowledge it. Michael Jordan doesn't miss it. He feels it the moment he steps inside. Grant, the manager, is practically glowing with fake enthusiasm. "Mr. Jordan, it's an honor. Right this way." His voice is too eager, his smile stretched a little too wide. Michael doesn't move right away. He's scanning the room, absorbing the energy. Something feels off. His eyes settle on the young waitress moving between tables. She's professional, quick on her feet, but there's something in her expression. Hesitation, unease. Michael finally follows Grant to a table, but as he sits, he keeps his attention on the waitress. When she approaches, he speaks before she can. "What happened before I got here?" His tone is casual, but his gaze is sharp. The waitress, her name tag reads Lena, freezes for a fraction of a second. It's barely noticeable, but Michael catches it. She recovers quickly, plastering on a neutral expression. "Sir." "You heard me," Michael says, leaning back slightly. "What happened?" Lena hesitates, her grip tightening on the notepad in her hand. She glances at Grant, who's standing a few feet away, his jaw tightening. Michael follows her gaze, then looks back at Lena. "Don't look at him. Look at me." Lena exhales slowly. Her voice is careful, measured. "A man came in earlier, just before you." Michael nods, encouraging her to continue. He wasn't dressed like the other customers," she says, choosing her words cautiously. "He looked like he was struggling. He just wanted to eat." Michael's jaw tightens slightly. "And?" Lena shifts on her feet. The manager asked him to leave. Asked? Michael repeats, testing the word. Lena swallows. Told him. Told him he wasn't welcome here. Michael's gaze flicks to Grant, who clears his throat. Sir, we have a reputation to uphold. You understand how these things work. Michael tilts his head slightly, considering him. Yeah? Why don't you explain it to me? Grant falters as if he wasn't expecting to be challenged. It's not personal, Mr. Jordan. It's just, our clientele expects a certain environment. Michael nods slowly, as if absorbing the words. Then he looks back at Lena. Did anyone stand up for him? Lena hesitates. No. Michael exhales, shaking his head. That's what I thought. A thick silence settles over the conversation. Michael glances at the empty chair across from him. Where is he now? Lena bites her lip. I don't know. He walked away. Michael pushes back his chair and stands. Grant's eyes widen. Sir, if there's an issue, I assure you. Michael ignores him and turns to Lena. If he comes back, would you recognize him? She nods. Good, Michael says. Let's go find him. Grant steps forward quickly. Sir, I really don't think... Michael holds up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The weight of his presence alone is enough to silence the man. Then, without another word, he strides out the door. Outside, the evening air is crisp, carrying the scent of rain that hasn't yet fallen. The city is alive, cars moving, people walking past, heads down, focused on their own worlds. Michael scans the streets, looking for someone who doesn't belong. Not in the way Grant meant, but in the way the world sometimes forgets people exist. Then he spots him. The man is sitting on a bench a block away, hunched over, his hands clasped together. He isn't begging. He isn't calling attention to himself. He's just... there. Alone. Michael and Lena approach, their footsteps slowing as they near him. Hey, Michael says gently. The man looks up, wary at first. His face is lined with exhaustion. But his eyes hold something deeper. Something that hasn't given up entirely. Lena steps forward. Sir, She hesitates, guilt flashing across her face. I should have said something back there. The man offers a small, tired smile. You're saying something now. Michael studies him. What's your name? Eric. Michael nods. Eric, I'd like you to come back with me. Eric blinks as if unsure he heard correctly. Why? Michael gestures toward the restaurant. Because that place needs to remember what respect looks like. Eric chuckles dryly. That place doesn't respect people like me. Michael shrugs. Then maybe we should remind them why they should. Eric looks at him for a long moment. Then, finally, he nods. When they step back inside, the shift is immediate. The low murmur of conversation stills. Forks pause mid-air. Grant stiffens near the entrance, his discomfort obvious. Michael walks past him without a glance, leading Eric toward his table. A different waiter approaches, hesitant. Sir, Michael doesn't let him finish. We're eating here. Bring the menus. The waiter nods quickly and rushes off. As they sit, Eric is visibly tense. He can feel the weight of the stares around him. But Michael doesn't seem to care, so Eric straightens his back and follows his lead. Lena approaches with a determined expression. What would you like? Eric looks at the menu but hesitates. Michael notices. Order whatever you want. Eric finally nods and places his order. As the meal arrives, the tension in the room remains, but something shifts. A few customers whisper, a few glance away, but no one dares to say anything aloud. Halfway through the meal, an older gentleman at a nearby table clears his throat loudly. This isn't the place for this kind of thing, he mutters. Michael sets down his fork. What kind of thing? The man hesitates, then scoffs. You know what I mean. Michael leans forward slightly. You mean treating someone like a human being? The man shifts uncomfortably. That's not what I... Because if that's what bothers you, Michael continues, Then maybe this place isn't for you. Silence. The man turns back to his meal without another word. Michael exhales, then looks at Eric. How's the food? Eric smirks. Best meal I've had in a long time. Michael grins. Good. As they finish eating, Michael signals for the check. Grant approaches hesitantly. It's on the house, sir. Michael shakes his head. Number I pay for what I respect. He places several crisp bills on the table. Then he pulls out another stack. And this, he hands it to Lena, is for speaking up. Lena's eyes widen. Sir, You're going to be just fine, Michael says simply. As he and Eric stand, the weight in the room shifts again. The stares are still there, the whispers still lingering. But Michael doesn't care. As they step outside, Eric turns to him. You didn't have to do this. Michael exhales, glancing up at the night sky. Maybe. But sometimes doing the right thing isn't about having to. It's about choosing to. Eric nods, understanding. Then, with a final glance at the restaurant, they walk into the night. Two men who, in different ways, had once been told they didn't belong. But tonight, they had rewritten that story. He was just hungry, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. And they threw him out, like trash. Michael Jordan doesn't react immediately. He doesn't slam his fist against the table or demand an explanation. Instead, he tightens his grip around his fork, his jaw clenching just enough for those paying attention to notice. A silence stretches between him and Lena. She swallows hard, glancing around, knowing she's said too much. Grant, the manager, shifts uncomfortably a few feet away, his forced hospitality now laced with unease. Michael exhales slowly. Then, with the kind of deliberate movement that commands attention, he sets his fork down on his untouched plate, and he stands. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifts. Conversations falter, waiters freeze mid-step. The hum of casual luxury is now laced with tension. Michael doesn't need to say anything. His actions alone send a message louder than any words could. Grant's smile twitches, struggling to stay in place. Sir, is something wrong? Michael glances at him, but his expression is unreadable. Then, without another word, he turns and walks out. He takes a breath, grounding himself. He didn't leave because he was angry. He left because this wasn't about him. He scans the street, searching. It doesn't take long. Half a block away, near a darkened storefront, a man sits hunched over, his arms wrapped around himself for warmth. The same man they had tossed aside moments ago. Michael walks toward him. The man doesn't look up right away, but when he does, there's recognition in his eyes. Not the starstruck kind, something deeper. Michael crouches down to meet his gaze. You still hungry? The man hesitates, then nods. Michael gestures toward the restaurant. Come with me. The man looks past him toward the glowing entrance, then back at Michael. They don't want me there. Michael smirks slightly. Yeah, that's about to change. When they step back inside, the room tenses. The clinking of glasses stops. Forks hover mid-air. Michael doesn't hesitate. He leads the man straight to the table he left moments ago. Lena is still standing there, her hands clutching her notepad. She catches Michael's eye, then looks at the man beside him. Understanding flickers across her face. Grant, however, is less composed. Sir, I don't think... Michael cuts him off without even looking at him. Bring another plate. Grant sputters. Mr. Jordan, please, this isn't... Michael finally turns to him. His voice is calm, but there's a weight behind it that makes Grant shrink back. Bring another. Plate Grant hesitates for a fraction of a second too long. Then, realizing he has no choice, he nods stiffly to Lena. Do as he says. Lena doesn't need to be told twice. She disappears into the kitchen. Michael pulls out a chair. Sit, he tells the man. The man hesitates. Not because he doesn't want to, but because years of being ignored, dismissed, and turned away have conditioned him to expect rejection. Michael sees it, and he waits. Finally, the man exhales and takes the seat. The whispers around the restaurant grow louder. Some customers glance away, pretending not to notice. Others stare openly, their expressions a mix of confusion and discomfort. Michael ignores them all. Lena returns with a fresh plate, setting it down carefully. She places a menu in front of the man, but Michael waves it away. "Give him the best thing you've got." Lena nods, offering a small smile before disappearing again. Grant is still standing nearby, his posture stiff. "Mr. Jordan, I'm sure you understand. We have an image to maintain." Michael turns to him, expression unreadable. "What image is that?" Grant hesitates. "We cater to a certain clientele." Michael leans back slightly. "You mean people who can afford it?" Grant shifts. "Well, yes." Michael gestures toward the man sitting beside him. "What if I told you he could afford it?" Grant blinks. Well, if that were the case." Michael cuts him off. "Would it change how you treated him?" Grant doesn't answer. Michael nods, as if that tells him everything he needs to know. The meal arrives, plated beautifully. The man stares at it for a moment, then picks up his fork. His hands shake slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of being treated with dignity. He takes a bite, closes his eyes for a second. When he opens them, there's something lighter in them. Michael watches, satisfied. Across the room, a customer mutters loudly enough to be heard, "This is ridiculous." Michael turns. "What is?" The man clears his throat. "This isn't how things are done here." Michael tilts his head slightly. "You mean feeding someone who's hungry?" The customer shifts uncomfortably. "That's not what I meant." Michael exhales, shaking his head. "Number. It's exactly what you meant." The man has no response. Michael turns back to his table. The meal continues in silence, but the air in the restaurant has changed. The illusion of exclusivity, of quiet cruelty disguised as sophistication, has cracked. By the time they finish, Michael signals for the check. Grant steps forward quickly. "It's on the house, Mr. Jordan." Michael raises a brow. "Why?" Grant hesitates. "As a courtesy." Michael smirks, but there's no humor in it. "You don't do things out of courtesy. You do them because you don't want this story getting out." Grant swallows. Michael places a few crisp bills on the table. "I don't take handouts." Then he pulls out another stack and hands it to Lena. "For telling the truth." Lena stares at the money, eyes wide. "Sir, I can't." Michael meets her gaze. "Yeah, you can." She nods, gripping it tightly. Michael turns to the man beside him. "You good?" The man nods slowly, a new kind of confidence in his posture. "Yeah." Michael stands. "Let's go." They walk toward the door together. This time, no one stops them. No one dares. Outside, the night feels different. Not just for them, but for everyone inside who witnessed what just happened. As they stand on the sidewalk, the man turns to Michael. "Why did you do that?" Michael exhales, looking out at the city. "Because some stories need to be told." And then, without another word, they walk into the night. Michael scans the street, searching. It doesn't take long. A few blocks down, slumped against the edge of a storefront, sits the man they had cast aside. His worn jacket is pulled tight around his body, his head slightly bowed, as if hoping the world will pass him by without noticing. Michael approaches quietly and lowers himself onto the cold concrete beside him. He doesn't say anything right away. He just sits. Not as a billionaire, not as a legend, just as a man. After a moment, he speaks. "I know what happened back there." His voice is steady, careful. "What's your name?" The man hesitates, as if debating whether to answer at all. Then, finally, he mutters, "Daniel." Michael stills. The name strikes something deep, something buried under years of success, of fame, of moving too fast to remember the past. He turns slightly, studying the man's profile, the lines on his face, the way exhaustion clings to his features. There's something familiar in the shape of his eyes, the way his shoulders hunch like he's used to carrying too much weight. Daniel. Michael repeats the name slowly, tasting it against old memories. Did you ever play ball? Daniel exhales a short laugh, dry and humorless. A long time ago. Michael nods, the pieces falling into place. High school? Daniel shifts slightly, turning to look at him for the first time. There's something cautious in his gaze, as if he's bracing for something he isn't sure he wants to hear. You remember, don't you? He says quietly. Michael exhales, his mind pulling back through years, back to a different time, a different version of himself. He remembers a game, a packed gym, the air electric with tension, and a boy, tall, quick, with a sharp mind and even sharper instincts on the court. A rival, a friend, someone who had once been unstoppable. Daniel. Michael leans forward, resting his arms on his knees. We played against each other. Senior year. Daniel nods slowly, a small, tired smile playing on his lips. State. Finals. You dropped 35 on us. Michael chuckles, shaking his head. And you dropped 36. Daniel laughs, really laughs this time, and for a brief moment, the weight in his eyes lifts. Michael studies him again, this time seeing more than just a man forgotten by the world. He sees the competitor, the kid who once ran the court like he owned it. What happened, man? Michael finally asks, his voice quieter now. Daniel sighs, rubbing a hand over his face. Life happened. He exhales, glancing out at the empty street. I had offers, scholarships, could have gone somewhere, but my old man got sick. My mom couldn't handle it alone. He pauses. I stayed behind. Took a job, then another. Time passed. One bad decision turned into two. Next thing I knew, I was here. Michael listens, the weight of Daniel's words settling deep. He knows how fragile fate can be, how a single turn can change everything. Why didn't you reach out? Michael asks. Daniel huffs a small, bitter laugh. To who? You. Man, you were off becoming Michael Jordan, the world's greatest. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep the lights on. He shakes his head. You don't call people when you've got nothing to show for yourself. Michael feels that hit in his chest, the truth of it. They sit in silence for a long moment, the city moving around them, oblivious. Then Michael reaches into his pocket and pulls out his wallet. He counts out a thick stack of bills and hands it to Daniel. Daniel stiffens, his jaw tightening. I don't need a handout. Michael shakes his head. This isn't a handout. He holds Daniel's gaze. It's a restart. Daniel stares at the money, then at Michael. There's something in his eyes, pride warring with exhaustion, dignity fighting against the desperate need for a break. After a moment, he exhales and takes it. I won't waste it, Michael nods. I know. A pause, then Daniel smirks slightly. Still can't believe you remember me. Michael chuckles. Man, how could I forget? You gave me my first real loss. Daniel laughs, shaking his head. Yeah, but look how that turned out for you. Michael shrugs. Maybe, but that doesn't mean I was supposed to forget the people who were part of the story. Daniel exhales, nodding slowly. Thanks, man. Michael stands, stretching. Get yourself back on your feet. Daniel looks up at him. What if I fail? Michael smiles. Then you get up again. Daniel nods. Michael turns to leave, taking a few steps before pausing. He glances over his shoulder. And when you're ready, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a business card, tossing it onto the bench. Call me. Daniel picks it up, staring at the name on it. Michael Jordan. A name the world never forgot. But tonight, Michael had remembered a name the world had let slip through the cracks. Daniel grips the card tightly, and for the first time in years, he believes he can start again. Michael Jordan sits on the cold pavement, staring at the man beside him. The name Daniel echoes in his head, dragging him backward through time, to a gym packed with roaring fans, to a night that had meant everything, The gym was electric. The scoreboard flickered. Final quarter, tied game. The crowd was on its feet, a wave of noise crashing over the court. Michael, young and hungry, stood at the top of the key, the ball resting lightly in his hands. Across from him, Daniel stood with that same dangerous intensity, muscles taut, ready to strike. They had been at it all game, trading buckets, neither willing to back down. Daniel was different from any player Michael had ever faced. Fast, unpredictable, and absolutely fearless. He didn't just keep up, he pushed Michael to his limit. With 15 seconds left, Michael drove to the basket, cutting through defenders with ease. But Daniel was there, reading him like a book. At the last second he sprang up, arms outstretched, clean, perfect defense. Michael had to adjust midair, twisting his body for a tougher shot. The ball rattled off the rim. Daniel snatched the rebound. 8 seconds left. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted down the court, moving like a shadow slipping through cracks. Michael chased him, heart pounding, but Daniel was already at the three-point line. 5 seconds. Daniel pulled up. The release was smooth, confident. The ball sailed through the air in slow motion as Michael watched helplessly. Swish. Buzzer. Game over. The gym exploded. Daniel had done it. He had beaten Michael Jordan. Michael stood frozen, the sting of loss burning in his chest. But beneath it, something else lingered. Respect. He walked over, breathing hard, and held out a hand. Daniel grinned, shaking it. "Not bad, Jordan." Michael smirked. "You either." Daniel laughed, slapping a hand against his back. "Next time, try to keep up." Michael had laughed too, and he had believed there would be a next time. But there wasn't. By the time the next season rolled around, Daniel was gone. No college ball, no pro dreams. Just disappeared. No one ever talked about why. And soon, even Michael stopped asking. The weight of the memory slams into Michael as he stares at the man beside him. The sharp, relentless Daniel he once knew now sits slumped, wrapped in a worn-out jacket, a shell of the player who had once made him fight for every point. Daniel watches him, his eyes tired but sharp, as if he already knows what Michael is thinking. "You remember now, don't you?" His voice is rough, worn by years of hardship. Michael exhales, running a hand over his face. "Yeah." Daniel chuckles, shaking his head. "Took you long enough." Michael leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What happened, man?" Daniel shrugs. "Life." Michael studies him. "Number not, just life. You were too good to disappear like that." Daniel smirks slightly, but there's no real humor in it. He stares at the city lights, his fingers absently tapping against his knee like he's dribbling an invisible ball. "My dad got sick," he finally says. "Mom was working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I had offers, full rides, but I couldn't leave them like that. I told myself I'd take a year off, save some money, then go." He pauses. But 1 year turned into 2, then 3. His voice drops lower. "Then I made some dumb choices, got mixed up in the wrong things, thought I could fix it, thought I could get back to where I was." Michael is silent. Daniel exhales. "Didn't work out that way." Michael shakes his head. "You should have called me." Daniel laughs, bitter this time. "Called you? You were out there becoming a legend, man. I wasn't about to pick up the phone just to tell you I was drowning." Michael clenches his jaw. He had been so caught up in his own rise that he never thought to look back, to check on the ones who had once been in the race with him. Silence stretches between them. The streets around them move, cars passing, strangers walking by, wrapped up in their own lives. Finally, Michael speaks. "Come with me." Daniel frowns. "Where?" Michael stands, dusting off his jeans. "Somewhere that isn't this." Daniel scoffs, shaking his head. "Man, I appreciate what you did back there in the restaurant, but I'm not some charity case." Michael folds his arms. "I didn't say you were." Daniel hesitates. Michael exhales. "Look, I'm not handing you a damn thing, but if you want a chance to get back on your feet, I can help. Daniel studies him, searching his face. Why do you care? Michael's expression softens. Because I should have cared sooner. A long pause. Then, slowly, Daniel nods. Daniel stands outside a gym, staring up at the entrance like it's some kind of test. Michael watches him. You gonna stand there all day? Daniel exhales, shaking his head. Man, last time I walked into a gym, I was somebody. Michael smirks. Then let's find out if he's still in there. Daniel glances at him, then at the doors. He takes a deep breath and steps inside. Michael watches Daniel closely, waiting for an answer. The streetlight overhead flickers, casting long shadows on the pavement. Daniel exhales, staring at the ground like the weight of his past is pressing down on him. His fingers twitch slightly like they used to before a big play, back when he still had a future. Michael doesn't rush him. Some stories aren't easy to tell. Finally, Daniel speaks. His voice is quieter now, rough around the edges. You really want to know what happened? Michael nods. Daniel lets out a humorless chuckle. All right. He leans back against the cold brick wall, staring up at the night sky. After high school, I had options. Real ones. A couple D1 schools wanted me. Nothing crazy, but enough to get me somewhere. I had a shot. He pauses. And then I lost everything. Michael doesn't blink. How? Daniel rubs a hand over his face. Because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. His voice hardens, his jaw tightening as if he's been holding this in for too long. There was this party. I wasn't even supposed to be there, but my boy dragged me along. Said some scouts were showing up, that it would be good for me to network, or whatever. Daniel scoffs. Should have just gone home. Michael listens, silent. Daniel exhales sharply. Cops showed up an hour later. Somebody had a stolen car outside, drugs inside. People started running. I didn't, because I hadn't done anything wrong. His eyes darken. That didn't matter. Michael clenches his jaw. He already knows where this is going. Daniel looks away. One cop, one crooked cop. He pointed at me and said I was the one dealing. He shakes his head. Didn't matter that I didn't have anything on me. Didn't matter that I was just standing there, minding my own business. He made his decision, and that was that. Michael exhales through his nose, his hands tightening into fists. Daniel laughs bitterly. You know what the worst part was? The school didn't even ask questions. They dropped me immediately. No hearing, no chance to explain. One day I had a future. The next day I was just another statistic. Michael shakes his head slowly. Didn't fight it, Daniel scoffs. Of course I fought, but you ever try fighting when the whole world already decided you lost? He looks away. Didn't matter what I said. They stripped my scholarship. My name was in the papers. My mom, his voice cracks slightly. He clears his throat. She didn't deserve that kind of shame. Michael breathes in deeply. And the charges? Daniel lets out a slow breath. Dropped, eventually, because there was no case. But by then, it was too late. No school wanted to touch me. My name was already dirty. He exhales, his fingers tightening into fists. I tried to keep going. Tried to get a second chance, but doors don't open the same once people decide you're a problem. Michael stares at him, absorbing every word. You ever try to climb back up, he asks, or did you just let them keep you down? Daniel flinches slightly. The question hits deep. He stays quiet for a long moment. Then, his voice barely above a whisper, he says, I stopped believing there was a way back. Michael exhales, his eyes heavy with something between anger and understanding. He's seen plenty of players lose their shot, some to injuries, some to bad choices, some to politics. But Daniel never even got the chance to fight for his future. Michael studies him for a long time before speaking. You still love the game? Daniel chuckles, but there's no joy in it. What does that matter? Michael tilts his head. Just answer. Daniel sighs. Yeah, I do. Michael nods. Then it's not over. Daniel shakes his head, laughing dryly. Man, I'm too old for this. Nobody's looking for a washed-up has-been. Michael leans forward. That's the thing. You're not a has-been. You're a never-got-the-chance. Daniel's jaw tightens. He doesn't argue, but he doesn't look convinced either. Michael leans back. Come to the gym with me tomorrow? Daniel looks at him, skeptical. Why? Michael smirks. Because I want to see if you still got that 36-point game in you. Daniel shakes his head. Man, I haven't played in years. Michael shrugs. So? Daniel hesitates. Michael pushes. What else you got going on? That lands. Daniel lets out a slow breath. Fine, one game. But if I suck, you don't get to say I told you so. Michael grins. Deal. For the first time in a long time, Daniel feels something unfamiliar. Hope. Michael Jordan doesn't believe in pity. It never fixed anything, never won games, never changed outcomes. But challenges force people to act. That's why he doesn't offer Daniel sympathy. Instead, he gives him something far more dangerous. A reason to stand. Come back to the restaurant with me, Michael says, his voice even. Daniel lets out a dry laugh, shaking his head. You think they're gonna let me in? Michael meets his gaze, expression unreadable. Oh, I'm not asking. Daniel watches him for a long moment as if trying to gauge whether he's serious. Michael just waits. No pressure, no begging. Just an open door, one Daniel has to walk through himself. Slowly, hesitantly, Daniel gets up. The city hums around them, neon lights flickering, the distant sound of a car horn cutting through the cool night air. Daniel shoves his hands into his pockets as they walk. This is a mistake. Michael doesn't respond right away. He lets the words settle. Maybe, he finally says. Or maybe it's exactly what's supposed to happen. Daniel exhales, staring down at the pavement. You know, I spent years trying to forget that night. The night I beat you. Michael smirks. Figured that'd be a good memory. Daniel shakes his head. Number because every time I thought about it, I thought about what came after. How fast everything got taken away. He pauses. How fast people forgot me. Michael slows his steps. I didn't forget you. Daniel scoffs. You didn't remember me either. Michael doesn't deny it. Because Daniel's right. He had forgotten. He had gotten so caught up in his own climb that he never looked back at who had been left behind. But he's here now, and that has to count for something. The restaurant comes into view. Daniel stops walking, his shoulders tense. This is a bad idea. Michael doesn't break stride. Then prove it. Daniel exhales sharply, then follows. The moment they step through the doors, the shift is instant. Conversations drop to a whisper. A few customers glance up from their plates before quickly looking away. The tension isn't loud, but it's there. And then there's Grant. The manager's face twists in barely concealed discomfort as he spots Daniel. He recovers quickly, forcing a strained smile. Mr. Jordan, back so soon? Michael doesn't waste time. We're here to eat. Grant clears his throat. Sir, I don't think... Michael cuts him off. That's your problem. You think you get to decide who belongs here. He leans in slightly. You don't. Grant swallows, glancing at Daniel, then back at Michael. Michael holds his stare, unblinking. Grant hesitates. Too long. Michael exhales, shaking his head. All right. He turns to Daniel. Come on. Daniel frowns. Where are we going? Michael gestures toward the best table in the house. That's where we're sitting. Daniel freezes. Man, that's... Taken? Michael interrupts. Not anymore. He walks toward it without waiting for a response. Daniel hesitates, then follows. The restaurant holds its breath. They sit. A waitress approaches, nervous. Not Lena, someone else, someone who looks like she doesn't know whether to take their order or run. Michael doesn't make it hard for her. He flips open the menu. "I'll have the steak, medium rare." The waitress nods quickly, scribbling it down. Michael glances at Daniel. "What about you?" Daniel shifts uncomfortably. The weight of 100 stares presses down on him. He glances at the menu, then back at Michael. His throat tightens. "The same." Michael nods, satisfied. "Good choice." The waitress hurries away. Silence lingers. The entire room is pretending not to watch, but they are. Daniel shifts, gripping the edge of the table. "I don't belong here." Michael leans back in his chair. "Why not?" Daniel huffs. "You know why." Michael folds his arms. "You ever think maybe they don't belong here?" Daniel frowns. "What?" Michael tilts his head toward the polished customers, the ones too busy looking down on him to see their own flaws. "Maybe the people who turn their backs on others don't deserve a place like this. Maybe it's not you who doesn't belong." Daniel lets the words settle. Before he can respond, the food arrives. The waitress sets down their plates with practiced precision. Michael picks up his fork and starts eating like this is just another normal dinner. Daniel stares at his own plate. The food looks unreal. Perfectly cooked steak, sides plated beautifully. A meal he hadn't even allowed himself to imagine in years. Michael watches him. "Eat." Daniel picks up his fork. Slowly, cautiously, he takes a bite. It's good. Too good. Something in his chest tightens. Michael doesn't say anything. He just lets him have this moment. As they eat, the tension in the room lingers, but something shifts. The longer they sit, the less power the whispers seem to have. Daniel exhales. "I keep waiting for someone to come over and kick me out." Michael smirks. "They'd have to kick me out, too." Daniel shakes his head. "You really think that'd happen?" Michael's expression turns serious. "I think people like Grant survive off fear, off knowing that most people won't fight back. But the second someone does?" He pauses. "They lose." Daniel watches him. Michael gestures toward the half-eaten meal. "And right now, you're winning." For the first time in years, Daniel believes him. When they finish, Michael signals for the check. The same nervous waitress brings it over. Before she can speak, Grant steps forward. "It's on the house, Mr. Jordan." Michael doesn't even look at him. He takes out his wallet, pulls out several crisp bills, and places them on the table. "I pay for what I respect." Grant swallows hard, nodding stiffly. Michael stands. Daniel hesitates, then does the same. As they walk toward the exit, Daniel feels something different. Lighter. Like for the first time in years, he's standing up straight. At the door, he pauses, looking back at the restaurant, the place that had once refused to see him. Michael watches him. "Ready?" Daniel exhales. Then, finally, he nods. They step outside. This time, Daniel doesn't look back. The moment Michael Jordan and Daniel step back inside, the energy in the restaurant shifts. Conversations falter, forks pause mid-air, and eyes dart toward them with barely concealed curiosity. Grant, the manager, spots them immediately. His expression darkens as he strides forward, irritation burning behind his carefully controlled mask. "I already told him," Grant starts, his voice sharp with frustration. Michael cuts him off, his voice deceptively calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You threw out a man who's got more talent in his pinky than you've got in your entire body." A murmur ripples through the room. Some of the customers are now looking at Daniel differently. Recognition flickers across a few faces. The whispers start. "Is that? Didn't he used to? He was supposed to go pro, wasn't he?" Grant glances around, clearly noticing the shift. But he doesn't back down. His pride won't let him. He straightens his posture and clears his throat. "Mr. Jordan, I understand your reputation, but rules are rules," he says, trying to keep his voice measured. "I can't allow—" Michael exhales slowly, shaking his head. He's had enough. His next words drop like a hammer, cutting through the tension in the room. You don't own this place anymore. Silence. For a moment, Grant blinks, not understanding. Then confusion turns to panic. Michael continues, his tone even. I made a few calls. Spoke to the right people. As of about an hour ago, this restaurant belongs to me. Grant's mouth opens, then closes. That's not possible. Michael pulls out his phone and holds it up. You can call the owner if you want. He smirks. Oh, wait, you'd have to call me. Lena, the waitress, gasps softly, her wide eyes darting between Grant and Michael. The restaurant is dead silent now. Grant looks around, searching for support, but the once polished crowd is suddenly hesitant. They know who Michael Jordan is. They know power when they see it. And right now, he owns the room. Grant forces a laugh, but it comes out shaky. All right, very funny. His eyes flicker with desperation. But let's be reasonable. I am being reasonable, Michael says, taking a step closer. You see, I don't like how this place operates. The way you treat people. He glances at Daniel. The way you decide who matters and who doesn't. Grant swallows. Mr. Jordan, please, let's... You're fired. The words hit like a knockout punch. Grant freezes. His lips part, but no sound comes out. Michael nods toward Lena. You're the new manager. Lena's eyes widen. What? You heard me, Michael says. Someone who actually sees people deserves to be in charge. Grant finally finds his voice. You can't do this. Michael raises a brow. I just did. Grant's face turns red. He opens his mouth again, but there's nothing left to say. He glances at the other staff members, at the customers still watching, waiting to see how this ends. And, for the first time, he realizes he's already lost. With stiff, jerky movements, he turns and storms toward the exit. He yanks the door open and disappears into the night. A heavy silence lingers. Then Michael turns back to Daniel. Now, where were we? Daniel lets out a short laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. You bought a restaurant. Michael smirks. Seemed easier than arguing. Daniel chuckles, rubbing a hand over his face. You're insane, man. Michael shrugs. You hungry or not? Daniel exhales, glancing around the restaurant that had once thrown him out. Now it belonged to someone who actually saw him. He nods. Yeah, I'm hungry. Lena, still looking stunned, quickly regains herself. She straightens her shoulders. I'll get you the best seat in the house. Michael grins. That's what I like to hear. As they sit down, the tension in the room eases. People go back to their meals, but there's something different now. The whispers are no longer about judgment. They're about change. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, he feels like he belongs. The restaurant freezes. Not a single fork scrapes a plate. Not a single customer dares to take a sip of their overpriced wine. The staff stands stiff, eyes darting between Michael Jordan and Grant, the manager who, just moments ago, believed he controlled everything. Grant's face is pale, his jaw working like he's struggling to find words. That's not possible. Michael smirks, pulling out his phone. 5 minutes ago, it wasn't. He glances at the screen, tapping a button. Now it is. He turns the phone around so Grant can see. On the screen is an email confirmation. The purchase contract signed, the deal finalized. Michael Jordan now owns this restaurant. Grant stares at the screen, blinking rapidly. This is a joke. Michael tilts his head slightly. Do I look like I'm joking? Grant stammers, glancing around for support, but there's none to be found. The same customers who had once admired him now shrink away, unwilling to get involved. The other staff members don't speak. Even Lena, who had been nervous all night, stands firm, arms crossed, waiting to see what happens next. Michael steps forward, his voice even. You work for me now. Grant swallows hard. Michael doesn't let him finish. And I don't tolerate cowards. A ripple of whispers moves through the restaurant. Grant's throat bobs as he swallows. Mr. Jordan, Michael waves a hand, already done with the conversation. You're fired. The words slam into Grant like a punch. His lips part, his mind scrambling for an argument, for a way out. But there isn't one. Michael doesn't give him a second chance. He turns to a security guard standing near the entrance, a man who had been silently watching the exchange unfold. See him out. The guard, a broad-shouldered man with a calm but firm expression, steps forward without hesitation. Sir. Grant's face flushes deep red. You can't. I just did, Michael says, already turning away. Grant sputters, trying to regain some sense of authority, but no one is listening. The security guard gently but firmly takes him by the arm, leading him toward the exit. The restaurant watches in stunned silence as Grant is escorted out the door. Then, just like that, he's gone. The weight in the room shifts. Michael turns back to the staff. All right, let's get one thing straight. His voice carries through the restaurant with quiet authority. This place is under new management. The waiters and cooks exchange glances, unsure what this means. Michael gestures toward Lena. You're the new manager. Lena's mouth falls open. Wait, what? You heard me, Michael says. You've got the right instincts. And more importantly, you know how to see people. He folds his arms. That's the kind of person I want running this place. Lena looks around as if expecting someone to correct him, but no one does. Finally, she nods, standing a little taller. Okay, I can do that. Michael nods approvingly. Then he turns to Daniel. Daniel raises a brow. What? Michael smirks. You're working here too. Daniel lets out a short laugh, shaking his head. Man, I haven't worked in a restaurant a day in my life. Michael shrugs. Then it's about time you started. Daniel watches him for a long moment, then exhales, a slow grin spreading across his face. You're serious? Dead serious. Michael leans in slightly. And if you say no, you're just proving every single one of those people right. Daniel's grin fades. He knows exactly what Michael means. If he walks out now, if he disappears into the night like nothing happened, then nothing will happen. But if he stays, that's something different. That's taking back control. Daniel exhales. Then, finally, he nods. All right. Michael claps him on the back. Good. Lena, still looking slightly stunned by her sudden promotion, clears her throat. So, what now? Michael glances around the restaurant, then smiles. Now? He steps back, gesturing to the tables, to the staff, to everything. Now, we start over. And just like that, the restaurant, once built on exclusion and silent cruelty, becomes something new. The restaurant changes overnight, not just in ownership, but in culture. The exclusive, cold atmosphere dissolves piece by piece. The overpriced menu stays, but a new section is added, one that anyone can afford. A pay-it-forward board appears near the entrance where customers can buy meals in advance for those who can't. And, most importantly, the doors are open to everyone. No one is turned away. No one is dismissed. The staff quickly realizes this isn't just about business. It's about respect. Lena, now manager, takes charge with quiet determination. She hires people who need second chances. Ex-cons looking to go straight, single parents struggling to make ends meet, and people like Daniel. Daniel doesn't just get a free meal, he gets a job, a path back, a reason to believe again. At first, he's skeptical. He's never worked in a place like this. He fumbles orders, drops trays, and gets frustrated when customers look at him the way they used to, like he doesn't belong. But Michael watches from a distance, not interfering, because Daniel needs to fight this one on his own. And he does. With each passing week, he stands a little taller. He gets better at handling customers. He starts making jokes with Lena. He stops flinching when people recognize him. Because now, when they recognize him, it's different. They don't just see the kid who was supposed to go pro. They see a man who refused to disappear. The gym smells the same. Sweat, rubber, the faint sting of disinfectant. The sound of basketballs bouncing off polished floors echoes through the empty space. Daniel stands just outside the entrance, staring at the court like it's some kind of test. Michael is already inside, spinning a ball on his fingertip. He doesn't look up as he speaks. "Took you long enough." Daniel exhales. "You sure about this?" Michael finally looks at him. "Are you?" Daniel hesitates. He hasn't played in years. Not like this. Not for real. But something about the way Michael is watching him, calm, expectant, tells him there's only one answer. Michael tosses him the ball. "You're not too old. You're not too far gone. You just forgot how to fight." Daniel catches it. The weight feels right in his hands. He dribbles once, twice. The rhythm is familiar, like an old song he hasn't heard in years but still somehow remembers. Michael steps back, giving him space. Daniel squares up, plants his feet, and takes the shot. The ball sails through the air, clean, precise. Swish. Michael nods, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "That's more like it," Daniel chuckles, shaking his head. "I was starting to think I lost it." Michael crosses his arms. "Nah, it was always there." He gestures toward the ball. "Question is, what are you going to do with it?" Daniel bounces the ball against the floor, catching it with ease. His grip tightens. And for the first time in years, he knows the answer. He's not done. Not even close. Some stories aren't just meant to be told. They're meant to change things. Second chances. Respect. The power to lift someone up with a single choice. What would you have done if you were in that restaurant? Maybe the real question is, what will you do the next time?